Draco Malfoy and the Letter from the Future. By Draco will hear about this. Chapter 2. Befriending the Boy Who Lived.
Draco, his mother said softly, making him look up from where he had been blankly staring at the filibuster fireworks on display in Gamble Jabba's joke shop. What's wrong, darling? You're so absent-minded today. You haven't even talked our ears off about getting him a broom.
Don't encourage gymnasticism,
his father drawled, a slow smile on his face.
I was quite enjoying the silence.
His mother rolled her blue eyes at her husband's input, but she was smiling at Draco expectantly. I'm fine, Draco said a little too quickly. I was just thinking.
Dangerous pastime, son, his father said, only half joking. Every time you think, you get ridiculous ideas, and I have to take time out of my day to answer your myriad of questions. Now, off you go to get your school robes. We don't have all day. I will just drop in with Flourish and Blot to check if they have that new volume I've been looking for. I will pick you up when I'm done.
With that, his father turned in a flurry of robes, striding off towards the bookshop further down the street. Draco looked back up at his mother to find that she was still watching him quizzically. Now that your father is gone, she told him with a secret smile, what is it that's on your mind, dear?
Draco gulped, shifting on his feet. All his instincts told him to tell his parents about the letter he had received last night, but the words of what was supposedly his future self made him hesitant. If the writer of the letter was right, then his father's opinion was not to be trusted. But how could he find out if the writer of the letter was to be trusted without asking for the opinion of his parents?
If you received a letter from someone claiming to be your future self,
Draco blurted out, finally meeting his mother's eyes,
would you believe it?
His mother rose her eyebrows at him, looking amused.
Have you been up last night reading those novels again, Draco? She asked. Might have,
Draco shrugged, figuring it was as good an excuse as any.
But I was just wondering how realistic it is. How can you know the letter is not a trick? Anyone could have written it, couldn't they? His mother hummed thoughtfully. I guess so, she said finally, frowning. It would depend on the content of the letter and if the things the letter predicts really end up happening. In the book, memories were attached to the letter,
Draco muttered, his heart hammering inside his chest.
Of their past, or, in other words, the character's future. Can things like these be faked? Of course they can, Narcissa conceded, but it takes impressive magical skills to do it convincingly, and of course someone would need a motive to go to such lengths.
Draco gulped.
That excluded Theodore Nott at the very least. But really, who would want Draco to rebel against his parents and to befriend Harry Potter? All grown wizards Draco knew were acquaintances of his parents, and they all shared his family's ideals.
None of them would benefit from Draco being led to doubt what he had been taught.
You should go get yourself fitted into your new robes, darling.
His mother's voice broke through his thoughts again.
Be sure to get a new set of dress robes, too. You've outgrown yours. Can you go by yourself? I'd like to have a look at Ollivander's in the meantime.
Sure, Draco nodded, sending her what he hoped was a reassuring smile.
Leave it to me, Mother. His mother squeezed his shoulder once, and then she too left to stroll further down the street. Draco watched her disappear into the crowd before he turned hesitantly to look at Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. His mother had suggested finding out whether the predictions of the letter came true, Draco reminded himself. That meant if Harry Potter really turned up at Madame Malkin's while Draco was there, the chances that the letter was real were pretty high. Because really, who did he know that could foresee when both Draco and the famous Harry Potter, who'd been kept from the wizarding world for 10 years, would enter the same robe shop? No one could manipulate that, could they? Steeling himself, Draco entered the shop and suffered through the fussing of the plump owner and her handsy assistant. Nervously, he kept glancing at the door as his oversized robes were pinned to the right length, waiting for the door to open. When it finally did, Draco almost tumbled down the stool he was standing on, because in came the same boy with messy dark hair that he had seen in the memory the letter had shown him. He wore ridiculously big and dingy muggle clothes Draco would have turned his nose up at under normal circumstances, and outrageously old-fashioned glasses, which seemed to be held together by some cheap kind of spello tape. The boy seemed intimidated, looking into the shop with the air of someone unsure whether they ought to be there before Madame Malkin rounded in on him.
"Hogwarts, dear?" she asked, and the boy nodded hastily. "Got the lot here. Another young man being fitted up just now, in fact."
She shooed him over to where Draco was standing on his chair, conjuring a similar one for the other boy to stand on, and pulled a robe over his head to begin her work. Draco's fingers were trembling slightly as he worked up the nerve to speak. "Hello," he said, trying to seem unaffected. "Hogwarts too?" "Yes," said the boy, looking over at him rather shyly. "I'm Draco." Draco introduced himself. "Draco Malfoy." "Harry Potter," the boy answered with a tentative smile. The effects of these words were immediate. Draco's breath came out in a gasp as the shop assistant pushed a pin into his side in shock, and Madame Malkin made a noise that sounded like a weasel that had its tail stepped on, staring up at the boy in front of her in shock. Harry Potter himself, though, seemed rather alarmed at that reaction, and he flushed uncomfortably. "Nice to meet you," Draco said at last, forcing himself to smile in a way that would seem friendly but not too eager, so that he wouldn't come around like an excited fan. The last thing he needed was for Harry Potter, the boy who lived, to think he was a loser. "Is this your first time denying Aunt Hallie?" "It is, actually," Harry answered, seeming thankful for the conversation to turn away from his name. "You been in before?" "Loads of times." Draco shrugged, automatically adopting a tone of superiority before he stopped himself. "Be polite and in no way condescending," the letter had said. "I mean," Draco added hastily, his voice rather small, "my parents take me along on their shopping every once in a while." "I see." Harry nodded, shifting on his feet, seeming nervous again. "So your parents are wizards too?" "Of course," Draco confirmed immediately. "The Malfoys are one of the Sacred 28. The moment the words were out, he wanted to kick himself. No talk about his pureblood status, the letter had warned. What the heck was he doing? "The what?" Harry asked, looking rather lost. "Never mind." Draco shook his head. "It's not important. What I mean is, yes, they are wizards." "You must know all about magic already, then," Harry said, looking rather miserable.
"Don't you worry, dear,"
Madame Malkin injected kindly, throwing Draco a disapproving look.
"There will be lots of students from Muggle families, and even the most pure-blood wizards need to go to school to learn."
"Right," Draco said quickly. "You'll pick everything up quickly, I'm sure." "So it doesn't make any difference?" Harry checked, his voice quiet as he met Draco's eyes, with rather bright green ones behind his shabby glasses. "Having grown up in a Muggle family?" Draco's heart beat fast as he held there his gaze. "No," he answered with determination. "It doesn't." Harry smiled at that, seeming relieved. "Good," he nodded. "And if you have any questions, you can always ask me," Draco offered. "I can help you find your way around." "Thanks," Harry replied, his smile widening. "It will be nice knowing someone before getting to school. I'm usually alone everywhere." He clasped his mouth shut as if thinking he had said too much. "Well, you won't be at Hogwarts," Draco promised. He gulped down the part about how everyone was going to want to be his friend the moment they heard his name, and continued instead, "Maybe we'll end up in the same house even." "The same house?" Harry asked curiously, and Draco was going to answer when Madame Malkin said, "That's you done, dear," and removed the finished robes from Harry's shoulders. As Harry got down from his chair, he spotted a giant of a man through the window holding 2 cones of ice cream, and Harry waved at him happily. "I've got to go," Harry said, turning to him. "I'll see you at Hogwarts then, Draco." "Yes," Draco nodded, smiling back at him. "See you." Draco watched Harry as he paid for his robes at the counter and made his way out of the shop. The huge bearded man pressed the ice cream into his hand, and they took off down the street, chatting happily. Draco wished he could follow and curse the dress robe his mother had asked him to get. But all in all, this had gone well, he decided. Harry had seemed pleased to meet him, and Draco had not insulted any of his friends, at least not that he realized. Yes, he would have to work on keeping his mouth shut about being a pureblood, but old habits died hard, so he didn't think he could be blamed for his slip. Important was that he had met Harry Potter at Madame Malkin's, the way the letter had predicted, and the boy had not ended up hating him. He could work his way towards the rest. Draco decided not to tell his parents about meeting Harry Potter, While he thought that they would not exactly disapprove of his attempt at befriending the famous boy, his father always went on and on about how important connections and public esteem were. He figured it would be best to keep his ambitions to himself out of fear of being influenced in a way that would end up ruining his chances at success. In the long weeks of August, he'd had a lot of time to consider the letter and its contents. He was fairly certain of its authenticity after meeting Harry for himself, and the implications of that had left his mind spinning for days after. Draco had been raised with firm beliefs of the superiority of his blood and status, and now with one letter, all that seemed to be crashing down around him, and he did not quite know what to do with himself. If he was not Draco Malfoy, heir of the Malfoy family and member of the pureblood aristocracy, who was he? He spent days and days in the library of the manor reading essays on the topic that he never fully understood and that left him more confused than before. He mulled over his questions at night, restlessly wondering if he was really willing to throw the belief in his heritage away for a dubious letter from the future. But then he remembered the memories he'd seen and the general feeling of desperation that had emanated from them. He was unsure what exactly they meant and what the future Draco had been through entailed, but he knew that none of it was good and that he did not want it to happen to him. And if that meant befriending Harry Potter and turning his back on what he had been taught, maybe it was worth it in the end. When September 1st finally approached, Draco became all the more restless. What if Harry decided he did not like him once he got to know him better? Draco had never had to befriend anyone without the help of his family name or the connections of his parents before. All kids he had ever hung out with were children of the acquaintances of his father, and even among them he was unsure who to call a friend. Crabbe and Goyle would be the closest thing, but that was only because they were too dumb to contradict him and just followed along. Others, like Theodore Nott, were the bane of his existence rather than what he would call friends. What exactly did one have to do to make friends? Not insulting people Harry liked, and not boasting over his blood status would only get Draco this far. What did you talk about with somebody you barely knew, and who had grown up in a world different from your own?
Are you sure you have everything?
His mother asked as she levitated his trunk down the stairs towards the entrance hall, looking at him inquiringly.
Robes, books, potion supplies, quill and parchment?
Yes, Mother.
Draco rolled his eyes, carefully carrying the cage containing his beloved eagle owl down behind her. You were there when the elves packed it. You know everything is there.
It doesn't hurt to check twice.
His mother shrugged, setting down the trunk at the foot of the stairs the same moment his father entered the entrance hall.
Ready, Draco?
He asked in unusually high spirits. In the last couple of days, Draco had gotten the impression that his father was just as excited for him to start school as Draco himself, if not more. He had gone on and on about the classes and the teachers, the Slytherin house, and the extracurricular activities he wanted him to consider. Draco took those bits of advice as what they were, the pressure of great expectations and the demand to come home with results befitting of the Malfoy name. The thought left a sour taste in Draco's mouth.
Upon key leaves in exactly 1 minute.
He held up an antique silver goblet demonstratively with one hand and summoned Draco's trunk with his other. His mother smiled at Draco as she put a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it as they joined his father. Lucius Malfoy was already counting down the seconds, his eyes on his wristwatch, and Draco held on to the cage under his arm tightly as he touched a finger to the goblet right next to where his mother's rested. As his father's count reached 0, the world started spinning and Draco closed his eyes, focusing on holding himself upright. When his feet touched the ground again, they had arrived at the apparition point near King's Cross.
Here we are,
his father announced cheerfully, pocketing the goblet and pulling Draco's trunk behind himself as he set off towards the entrance of the station. Draco hastened to follow him, sending nervous looks to the muggles nearby who frowned at their robes and his owl. Aquila let out an indignant sound as if he too condoned the judging looks. As they neared the alcove between platforms 9 and 10, Draco's mother explained in a hushed voice which barrier he needed to pass to get to the magical platform, and Draco observed carefully as his father went ahead and disappeared from sight before doing his best to copy him. Platform 9 3/4 was busy when he appeared, bustling with wizards and witches and cats and owls, and Draco immediately stretched his neck trying to spot Harry.
Look, there are Linda and Gregory,
His mother pointed out the Goyle family, misinterpreting his searching gaze, and Draco resigned himself of a long while of watching their parents do the talking, while receiving only one-syllable answers from the burly boy within. All in all, he was glad when they could excuse themselves to the train after the arrival of the crabs, under the pretense of wanting to capture the best available seats. His mother fussed over him some more in parting, reminding him to write regularly, work hard, and stay out of trouble, and then they were finally free to explore the train. In his search for Harry, Draco chased Crabbe and Goyle down 2 wagons of mostly free seats before they started to complain, and finally settled in an empty compartment. Draco took the window seat and watched the passing wizards closely, hoping to spot the messy, hair-bespectacled boy. But when the train finally took off, he had still not found him.
Do you think there is any food here?
Crabbe grunted the first full sentence he had spoken that day.
I think there was a trolley coming through at some point, selling sweets.
Draco drawled, waving absent-mindedly at his mother as they sped away.
Shall we go look for it?
He suggested, jumping at the excuse to investigate the train some more.
But we just sat down,
Goyle complained moodily, though when Draco sent him an annoyed look, he closed his mouth and got to his feet. It took them ages to get from one side of the train to the other, and then, still not having found Harry, they had to go all the way back again towards the other side. They passed the trolley twice on their way, but Draco ignored Crabbe and Goyle's complaints as he pushed on, searching. At last, Draco spotted Harry in the compartment right towards the end, excitedly chatting with a red-haired boy, empty and half-eaten containers of chocolate frogs, Bertie Bott's beans, and other sweets all over the place. When Draco pushed the door open, Harry looked up and smiled brightly at him.
Draco, he called. I was wondering when I would meet you.
Hello, Harry, Draco returned, a relieved grin spreading over his face. He looked over to the red-headed boy, noting that suspicious blue eyes were looking him up and down. Draco took a short moment to take inventory of the shade of his hair and the shabby clothes, immediately identifying a member of the Weasley family his father had ranted on about so often. His heart sank a bit.
Oh, this is Ron.
Harry introduced him cheerfully, following Draco's gaze.
Ron, this is Draco. I met him in Diagon Alley a couple of weeks ago.
All safe, the boy said slowly, nodding his head in greeting.
Ron Weasley. Nice to meet you.
Draco Malfoy, Draco answered, noting the Weasley boy's eyes narrowing just so slightly at hearing his last name.
Pleasure.
Then, only just remembering they were there, he waved to the boys behind him. This is Crabbe and Goyle. The 2 of them grunted, in apparent confusion as to why they were even there talking to these people.
Hello, I'm Harry Potter.
Harry introduced himself, and Draco did not need to turn to know their eyes had grown the size of saucers at those words. There was a stunned silence. Harry met Draco's eyes, looking unsure.
You want to sit down?
He offered, gathering some of the wrappers and pushing them hastily off the seat next to him. Draco ignored the mess and took the seat. He saw Weasley exchange cautious looks with Crabbe and Goyle as they remained standing.
Ron was just telling me about Quidditch,
Harry said conversationally, and Draco frowned. You play? He asked Weasley, trying to keep his voice even and free of judgment.
Yes,
Weasley shrugged somewhat defiantly.
Since I've been young, with my brothers. Charlie was Gryffindor's seeker before he graduated, and Fred and George are beaters on the team.
I see. Draco nodded.
I wished first years could own a broom and try out too, he huffed.
Oh no! Weasley agreed in frustration, apparently momentarily forgetting his suspicion of Draco.
It's so unfair! Who is to say we aren't good enough?
Exactly! Draco stressed. I've been flying since I could walk. That's more than some 7th year who never touched a broom before coming to Hogwarts can say. He remembered Harry's background at this point and added quickly, I mean, not that that's a bad thing. He turned to Harry, trying to smile reassuringly, and Harry smiled back, making it worth his effort. Draco noted Crabbe and Goyle exchanging startled looks. So, he asked, turning to Weasley in an attempt to keep the conversation going, do you follow the league? Which is your favorite team?
The Dudley Cannons,
Weasley answered proudly. You? My family has season tickets to the Falcons. Draco shrugged. A little sad I can't go anymore, but then again, we can march the house championship.
Right.
Weasley frowned, his eyes narrowing.
I guess you'll be in Slytherin.
He prodded, an edge to his voice. Well, my whole family was in Slytherin, so I would think so, Draco said casually, and saw Weasley exchange a meaningful look with Harry. What? he demanded a little defensively. "Is there a problem with that?" "No," Harry protested, too quickly shaking his head. "Not at all. We were just talking about houses earlier and how I'll probably end up in Hufflepuff, because I know nothing." "You're not going to be a Hufflepuff!" Draco frowned, scandalized. "Knowledge of the wizarding world doesn't decide over which house you end up in. It's the character that counts." "I told him that too," Weasley nodded. "Don't worry, it's going to be fine." Crabbe cleared his throat and Draco looked up, once again having forgotten their presence. "Should we go and meet Nott?" Crabbe asked, who buzzed his compartment earlier. "You can go if you want," Draco drawled. "I'll stay here." The two boys exchanged reluctant looks at that. "It's okay," Draco repeated. "I'll catch up with you." Finally, the two of them shrugged and turned to leave. Silence fell upon their compartment as the door fell closed behind them. "Is it okay not to go with your friends?" Harry asked. "I wouldn't call them friends," Draco shrugged. "They are the sons of father's acquaintances. I've just known them for a long time." "Your father is Lucius Malfoy, right?" Weasley asked suddenly. "Yes," Draco answered, uncomfortable with the subject. "Why?" "Nothing." Weasley shrugged, but his tone indicated that it wasn't nothing at all. Draco's instinct was to call him out on it, but he was pretty sure that nothing Ron Weasley would have to say about his father could be positive, and he did not want Harry to hear any of it if he could help it. So we turned to Harry and started babbling about what he had heard about their classes and teachers, and Harry seemed eager to listen. Weasley joined in reluctantly, and their conversation went on until a bossy, bushy-haired girl pushed open the door to announce they would arrive soon and to tell Harry and Weasley to change into their robes. Draco then returned to his own compartment to collect his things, only to find that Theodore Nott had settled with Crabbe and Goyle, apparently having a blast. He was talking animatedly as Draco pushed the door open, and when he turned to look at him, his smirk widened. "Malfoy," he called, "I heard you made friends with the youngest Weasley boy." He snickered, and Crabbe and Goyle shifted nervously. "Just for your information," Draco sneered, stepping into the compartment and letting the door fall closed behind him, "I was there because of Harry Potter. Because, unlike you, I strive to make the most useful and influential friends I can while at Hogwarts." Nott snorted, and Draco stretched to pick up his sleeping owl, quite satisfied with himself. "If I were you, I'd be careful not to be seen with blood traitors and the like." Nott scoffed. "I'm sure your father wouldn't be so pleased." "Let that be my worry," Draco sniffed. He held on to the wall as the train started to slow down, keeping his balance just so. Aquila unstuck his head from under his wing, looking at Draco indignantly. "We seem to be there," Draco announced, looking at Crabbe and Goyle. "You coming?" The boys exchanged startled looks before looking at Nott for instruction. Draco frowned. "Why don't you go and catch up with your best pal, Weasley?" Nott smirked. "We will be nearby, laughing." Draco sneered at him, clinging to the cage in his hands. "Whatever," he huffed. "Not like I care what you do." And with that he turned and left the compartment, off to find Harry. The Hogwarts castle was stunning, even for someone who had grown up in a manor and was used to magic. Still, Draco found himself watching Harry almost as much as he was taking in his new school. The expression of utter fascination on Harry's face brought him inexplicable joy. All his life his father had gone on and on about his view that children from non-magical backgrounds should never be admitted, that they would never understand their traditions and way of life, and that they were a danger to the wizarding community at large. But seeing Harry's innocent enthusiasm, he could not relate to his father's words at all. What harm could someone like Harry possibly bring to anyone? After they had crossed the lake with Hagrid, the gamekeeper, and the very same giant of a man Draco had seen Harry with at Diagon Alley, the doors to the castle opened and they were given into the care of Professor McGonagall, who Draco knew was deputy headmistress and head of Gryffindor House. His father had warned him never to cross her, since she was apparently a very strict woman who was not to be tampered with, and meeting her for himself, Draco could immediately tell that he had been right in that aspect. "Of course, cheers, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid said importantly, gesturing to the lot of them at launch.
"Thank you, Hagrid," she returned cordially. "I will take them from here."
And with that she led them into the huge entrance hall, past the doors to the famous Great Hall, and into a small side room.
"Welcome to Hogwarts,"
she called when they had all filed in.
"The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the great hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room."
As Professor McGonagall went on to introduce the 4 houses, Draco sneaked a look at Harry, who was listening to the teacher with full attention. He hoped with all his might that Harry would end up in Slytherin with him. For a moment he let himself dream of sharing a dormitory with him and sitting in the common room every evening playing chess or just talking, making fun of Nod together.
"I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours,"
Professor McGonagall finished, and Draco snapped back to attention.
"The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting."
Her eyes travelled over Longbottom and Weasley, and Draco had to suppress a smile. He noted Harry desperately trying to flatten his messy hair next to him as Professor McGonagall told him to wait for her return and left. "How exactly do they sort us into houses?" Harry asked both Draco and Weasley the moment she had the door behind herself. "Some sort of test, I think," Weasley answered with a frown. "Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." "Oh, come on, Fitz!" Draco rolled his eyes. "There's no test! Father said some kind of old magical artifact decided over it and with the 4 founders." Weasley seemed irked at being contradicted, but Harry relaxed slightly. "So I don't have to do any magic?" he checked with Draco. "Of course not," Draco assured him. "Imagine a bunch of first years attempting to cast spells without instruction and blowing up the Great Hall. No, I don't think we have to do anything." "Good." Harry nodded, taking a deep breath. "Good." Then they were all distracted by the unexpected entrance of the school ghosts, which made several people scream, and Draco clasped at Harry's elbow in shock, though he felt incredibly stupid at his overreaction. He was thankful when Professor McGonagall returned and ordered them to form a line and follow her outside. Harry ended up behind him with Weasley in his shadow and the bushy-haired girl they had met in the train in front of Draco. The girl was muttering to herself furiously, and Draco eyed her warily. As they entered the Great Hall, though, Draco was momentarily distracted. The Malfoy Manor was grand, of course, but no room in there could compare to what he saw here. The ceiling was spelled invisible, showing the bright starlight sky outside, and Draco couldn't help but stare at it in awe.
"It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts History,"
the girl in front of him explained importantly as they passed down 4 long tables. The house tables, Draco supposed, and the other students were looking at them curiously, making Draco walk a little straighter. They came to a stop in front of the teacher's table, and Professor McGonagall put down a stool in front of them, on which she gently placed an old battered hat. Draco made a face at the state of it, hoping they didn't have to touch it. Silence fell upon the hall, and then, to his surprise, the hat opened a ridge-like mouth and started singing. "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hat sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can see, so try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be." Draco smirked, turning to Harry to point out that he had been right and they just had to try on a hat. But his voice died in his throat as he saw the focused look on the other boy's face. He looked at the sparkle in those green eyes for a moment longer before focusing back on the scene in front of him. "So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap." The hall burst into applause, and Draco joined in, grinning as Weasley muttered to Harry, "Oh, Gilfred! He was going on about wrestling a troll!" Draco suppressed a comment about how it probably wasn't hard to fool a Weasley. He couldn't blame his brother. He was practically asking for it. Professor McGonagall then stepped forward, a roll of parchment in her hand, and began to call out names. One by one, the students went up, sat on the stool, and let her lower the hat under their heads. After varying intervals, the hat called out their house, and they went to sit at their respective tables under loud cheers. Draco noted that Harry looked practically green in the face the more people were called forwards, and he touched his fingers to his elbow, making the other boy look over to him nervously. "It will be all right," he whispered. "Don't you worry."
Harry tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace.
"Granger? Hermione?" Professor McGonagall called, and Draco noted the strange girl next to him storming towards the stool in an overly eager manner.
"Gryffindor!" shouted the aunt. Weasley groaned. Draco smiled. At least he did not have to deal with that one all that much.
It wasn't long, then, until Professor McGonagall called his name. Draco took a deep breath, straightened himself, and tried to seem unaffected as he walked over to the stool and sat down. He closed his eyes as the hat was lowered onto his head, and immediately it shouted, "Slytherin!" Draco smiled as he got to his feet. He tried to catch Harry's eyes in encouragement, but the other boy was frowning, looking slightly unhappy. His housemates were cheering as he took his seat at the Slytherin table, but Draco immediately craned his neck for Harry, nervously waiting for Harry to be called forward. When he was, murmurs broke out over the whole hall, but Draco ignored them as he bit his lip, wishing with all his might that Harry would join him at the Slytherin table. The Sorting Hat took his time with Harry, and Draco saw the other boy clasp his hands around the edges of the stool. He wished he could see his face, but the hat was so big it was covering it almost entirely. Finally, the hat called, "Gryffindor!" Draco's heart sank. He felt numb as he watched Harry cross the room to take a seat at the Gryffindor table, accompanied by spectacular cheers of his housemates. He could even hear some people chant, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" A red-headed boy was shaking Harry's hand enthusiastically, and Draco wondered quite miserably if he was related to Weasley.
"Wish you'd been chosen for Gryffindor now, don't you, Malfoy?"
Not scoffed, smirking, but Draco did not dignify him with an answer. He was too busy trying to hide his disappointment. After the last students had been sorted into their houses and Weasley had joined Harry in Gryffindor, the feast began, and after that, the headmaster Albus Dumbledore stood to give some notices, but Draco found it hard to focus on any of it. The other first-years in his house seemed to have gathered around Nott, including Crabbe and Goyle, and Draco found himself alone among the masses. He kept throwing longing glances over to where Harry was sitting with Weasley, chatting enthusiastically, and cursed the unfairness of the situation. He had met Harry first! It should be Draco next to him, and not some dim-witted Weasley. Even worse, despite how hard Draco had tried being polite to the boy, it was very clear that Weasley disliked Draco. Who knew what he would tell Harry about his family? Draco was sure that Weasley would try everything he could to prevent Draco from befriending Harry, and with them being in separate houses, Draco was in clear disadvantage. Weasley would get to share his dormitory, meals, classes, and common room, and Draco would be lucky if he got to talk to Harry for a moment in the corridors. How would he manage to go close to him that way? The thought despaired Draco not just because of the letter, but because he found he honestly liked Harry. He never felt the particular need to befriend another person before, but he wanted to be Harry's friend, and after spending time with him, the people he usually spent time with felt like a poor consolation prize. When the feast ended, the prefects led them down to their quarters in the dungeons. Nott was chatting excitedly as they settled into their dormitory, though no one really answered him. Blaise Zabini was a quiet sort of fellow, and Crabbe and Goyle had gone back to their usual eloquent way of communication. One-syllable grunts. And Draco felt frustrated and terribly alone as he threw himself onto his bed, staring up at the canopy of his four-poster bed. "If you're going to cry about not being sorted into Gryffindor, Malfoy, please draw the curtains first." Nott snickered. "I'd hate to watch such a pathetic sight." Draco showed him the middle finger and drew his curtains anyway, keen for some privacy. As he heard Nott laugh, he pressed his eyes closed, urging himself not to prove the get right in his statement.